Welcome to No Occasion to Shout. He who truly knows has no occasion to shout. And this is the only YouTube show on all of YouTube that actually lets you vote for your episodes. So go to patreon.com. Don't look that up on the internet and see if it's true. It is. Trust me. Would I lie to you? I wouldn't.
I was wondering myself.
No, we are the only ones to do it. And if anyone else says they do it, they're lying to you.
Or they've just copied us.
Or they've just copied us.
Oh, I like it. And by the way, I just want to reiterate, Austin, because this you said that before, and I emphasized that you don't mean vote for the episode. You mean vote to choose what the episode's going to be about, right? Not just which ones you like, right? I just want to be clear. That's what you mean.
Yes, so you can go to patreon.com/nooccasion. There's 9 votes right now, and a character analysis of the character Iroh from Avatar: The Last Airbender is the one that's winning now. And you can keep voting. Until then,
I should say, for people who are new to this show, the kind of conceit here is that Austin comes up with great ideas for he and I to discuss, and I never have a clue what they are, and I don't know what he's just said. I have no clue what that means, which is why this is kind of funny and fun, because Austin always picks these great topics that kind of make me think, and you're watching me think in real time, and Austin's done some thinking for himself, and so we have great conversations.
The first reactions of a philosopher and a physicist
on a good day,
on
a good day.
And then until then, we're just going to be doing boring episodes. So this is our boring episode.
Don't say that. Don't say that.
This episode is going to be, Robin, on your Purism article. And it's not going to be convoluted and all over the place, because I read a quote that made your article make sense in my mind from a pragmatic sense. Because the problem I had with your article wasn't that I didn't understand what it meant. It was that I didn't know where to go from there.
Okay, what do you mean? So you read it, you went, okay, that's right, now what?
Yeah, it made me like, okay, so what do I believe? Do I believe anything? Am I still even a libertarian? Like,
okay, so first of all, let's actually say, because it was some time ago, it was a month or 2 ago I wrote it, I think. What's the title of the article? The title of the article is Purism Isn't Principled in an Impure World, correct?
Correct.
And it's on my website and on FEE, Foundation for Economic Education website. Yeah, and it was, for what it's worth, a culmination of something I've been thinking very deeply about for years. And it's a long piece. It's deep.
I think it's something that everybody who isn't in the politics understands at a core level that they're unable to articulate. Because if you ask someone like, hey, do you want to talk about politics? They say, no, I would rather go play video games.
Yeah,
that response right there is kind of proof. Because if purism was principled, then those people would feel compelled to have some purist stance and go to a party and vote and do things.
Well, hold on, whoa. That's controversial, because purist politics, especially purist libertarian politics that you and I are very interested in, those libertarian purists are probably the last people who would go to vote.
So unless your purist philosophy is that voting is bad, yes. But I read a quote that made it all make sense to me in my head, Robin. And this was the quote. It was, whenever we talk about the past, everyone is so concerned and so scared that the smallest action that they will perform will change the entire course of history. And yet, no one ever thinks about small changes in the present that will affect the future.
Who said that?
I have no idea. It was... I probably cleaned it up a little bit from the original post. I think it was a shower thought on Reddit.
Okay, so you're saying that people when they're thinking about history, they think about small things that change the trajectory of history, but they don't think equivalently about things that could be done today that can do the same thing.
Oh, that could be, that works too. But in particular, they were talking about time travel. How whenever there's a time travel movie, or like however people think about time travel, there's always this plot, like in Back to the Future, or like things. Okay. There's always this idea that like if you move a pencil, the whole world is going to you destroyed the world because you changed the course of history.
And as you say that, I'm thinking of chaos theory, which I reference in that article. Do I not?
You do. So yeah, small changes are what's going to, I think, make differences. I think that helped me cope with. I think that I went to LibertyCon, and I had a lot of great conversations with people on the bus. And one of the person with whom I was talking, I talked to him about, like he thought that there should be, basically it was an article about, or a talk about gun control. Because I said that, is there a difference between natural rights insofar as you need a license to drive a car and you need a license to drive a gun? And his argument was basically that you should not need a license, and there should not be any age restrictions for anything. He said there shouldn't be alcohol limits or anything. Everything should be gone. And then I basically philosophically explained the Purist article. And then he said, you know what? I think you're right. And then he said, let me rephrase that. If we were to redo all of society and made these rules, then they would work, because then no one, because the reason people go out and drink on their 21st birthday is because they're told this is when they can do it. If they were allowed to drink their entire
life. Actually, just to your point, because that's an interesting point, an interesting example. The reason they go and drink on their 21st birthday is because they're told they absolutely can't before their 21st birthday, which is a slightly different thing. But yes, your point is well taken.
So when they lowered the drinking age in the Vietnam War, I believe it was, to 18 in the United States, because historist and intellectually, logically correct argument that I can go to war and die, so I can die, but I can't drink alcohol. So they changed it to 18, and then car accidents skyrocketed. And then they had to bring it back down. Well, that's because in human nature, if you tell someone they can't do something, they're going to want to do it. So then we got onto, okay, so we know that purism doesn't exist, so none of that exists. So now what do we do?
Hold on, what do you mean? Purism doesn't exist? Well, we need to, I think I know what you mean, but what you mean, I think, is the point in the article, in which case, since you said it, we should explain it.
Yes. So now
purism kind of exists. The thing is, it's not what people think it is.
Yes. Now that we know that purism only is going to be applicable if we wiped everyone's minds and put them on a new scenario, and it doesn't necessarily work in so far as we think we do, or think it's going to, or that it won't result in perfect changes.
Right. So we need to explain why that's the case, right? Which is what the article kind of does at length with lots of kind of science and I think other examples. But there's a couple of reasons for what you've just said, and I think this is what you're getting at. And if I'm wrong, you correct me.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Do a shortened argument for the entire article.
Okay, so where to begin? If you started with a clean slate and this is what the way you were going at it. You start with a clean slate and you built the rules for the world. Maybe let's allow in principle that there's a set of rules that will give you your ideal world, ideal by whatever metrics you think are the important ones. If you're a libertarian, that might be liberty. You know, if you're a theocrat, it might be adherence to Sharia law. I mean, whatever. But whatever your metric is. So you make this ideal world. Now, the problem is there's two big problems that we find ourselves in when we try and argue from the logic that makes that world, that explains why that world by those rules is the ideal world. Two, therefore, what we should do is implement what's in that ideal world even if we're starting in this non-ideal, physical, relativist, messy world. And it's a fallacy that because, if you like, all of these variables are set in all these different ways. Like I imagine a graphic equalizer, right?
Mhm.
You know, in the ideal world, like, you know, the anarcho-capitalist world, you know, we know what these ideals are. These people tell us what these worlds look like and how they operate and what the rules are. But it's a fallacy to say, because that would be ideal, therefore, the best possible world we can get to, starting where we're at, is to set every variable, every policy, as close to the ideal as possible. Now you'd say, how can that not follow logically? Well, the reason it doesn't follow logically is there's two big ones. One is the theory of second best, which tells you that in general, if you have a bunch of input variables that give you a optimal outcome, if one of the variables is held at a suboptimal value, then the second best outcome that you can get will not, in general, will not necessarily be obtained by having all of the variables that you can control fixed as they would be if the variable that you can't control was controllable and therefore set at its optimal value.
I.e. communism.
Well, no, not i.e. anything. Just it's mathematics.
Yes,
It's like
but a real life example of it, of the theory of second best, would be Marx's ideological formula in his head for a perfect world and the result of it. Is that correct?
Well, no, I would say that isn't correct, because I would say his formula is wrong.
Okay.
But what I'm saying is, even if you have some, you know, infinite knowledge, and you understand human nature perfectly, and what you think are the highest values are, in fact, in some abstract sense, the highest values. So for an anarcho-capitalist, that might be, you know, liberty, right? Whatever. Even if you're right on all of that, and even if you're right about all of the policies and how all of the things that can be fixed should be fixed to give you the ideal outcome, maximum liberty, if one of your 100 variables is not at its optimal value and you can't control it, then because the variables are actually interdependent, the outcomes that you get from this complex system depend not just on the variables themselves acting separately, but on interrelationships among the variables, right? So that if one is in a suboptimal place, the best place for another isn't where it was before, right?
You know,
It's complex. And so what I'm saying is, you can't know, you can know perfectly what the ideal world looks like and even how to get it. I'm not saying you can. Even if you allow that you can, it doesn't follow from that if there's one part of the world you can't control, that you know what the ideal settings are of every other part of the world.
St. Thomas Aquinas makes
every other variable,
a similar argument to this in regards to free will, and why, because there was in the Summa Theologica, he makes a question, answers the question, and the question was like, how can bad things happen if God is all powerful? And his answer to that was basically that, regarding free will. So I think that's interesting.
Oh, that's interesting. It occurred to me that one way of saying this is, you know, when people say, well, yeah, that would work in theory, or that would work in an ideal world.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, in many ways that's unsatisfying, because you're saying, well, let's approach the ideal world, right? Like, that's not a reason to throw it out. Well, that's true, except that what I'm saying is, it's actually a mathematical fact that what you understand about the ideal world can't be applied directly in a world that you can't completely control. I.e., if you may know what ideal looks like for every bit of the world, but in that situation, what's ideal over here depends on this being ideal over here. Once it isn't ideal over here, the ideal over here changes in ways that whatever system you used, or theory you used, or metrics you used to determine this was ideal, no longer tells you what your next best option is. And so it's this is very abstract, which is why I wrote the article, because I had to put concrete examples. But that's only one half of the problem. The other half of the problem,
theory, is that another one?
So well, let's leave that aside, because that's kind of another level down. The other fundamental reason why, as Yogi Berra said, in theory there's no difference between theory and practice. In practice there is this problem of the transient effects. Now, if ever you've been in I don't know what physics education is like in America these days, but I would hope that even a high school physics student would maybe remember getting a simple circuit with just 3 components: a capacitor, maybe an inductor, and a resistor. And you may know that if you have this resistance, this capacitance, this inductance, you can set this output voltage, let's say, or output current that you're interested in. Now, that's all very well, and you may understand how these inputs get you to that output. But if you're starting with the input set differently, and you change the variables in the system so that you get the output you want,
then you can build a radio.
Exactly. This is exactly, that's true. This pertains very much to that. But what you can show, even with a system as simple as with 3 electrical components. So if you're talking about an entire country with 360 million free wills, then obviously this problem I'm about to tell you is there in spades. The problem is that when you make a change, the outputs of the system go through a transient stage. And what happens during the transient stage, i.e. the variables that govern the output during the change, are different from the ones that govern the output in final equilibrium. Now, when you're doing political philosophy, you're invariably talking about not dynamics, but static models, right? So the problem is that there's no political philosophy that is concerned with an ideal equilibrium or any kind of endpoint that, even in principle, this is another mathematical fact, can tell you what happens if you perturb from the imperfect world, you perturb it, you change some variables to try and move it to the perfect. Now, the reason this is particularly problematic, and the reason why purism isn't principled in a non-ideal world, is because it may be that the variables that govern the transient effects will actually, during the transient, move the outcome in the opposite direction from what you wanted when you changed the variables or set the policies to improve the world. So necessarily,
a good example of this is with abortion, because I know when Obama was in office, there was less abortions, and when Bush was in office, there was more abortions, and that mostly had to do with decreasing availability, leading to more poverty, and that leading to more abortions. And I'm not saying in general, I'm just saying in certain cities, that would be examples.
So in that example, it's important to distinguish between actually being wrong about tighter abortion legislation gets you fewer abortions, even in static equilibrium, right? That you could actually be wrong about that. So that might explain it.
But differently. It does exist, though. Yes, I agree.
So I want to separate that possibility from, even if you're right about that, right? Even if it is the case that tougher abortion legislation will get you eventually less abortion, the change may get you from one state to another, may get you more abortion, even though
now with variables.
Yeah. Now,
gun control is the same thing.
It is. Now, the thing to say about that is, somebody could rightly say, well, yeah, but okay, that's a short-term effect. We'll take the hit for the long-term gain. And they would be right. That would be consistent. But it wouldn't defeat the point of the article, because the point of the article is that most transient effects aren't that simple. Like, you can't say, okay, we see there's a limited period of abortions going up before they come down. That's worth paying to do the right thing if you're pro-life. You know, you can make the argument in many situations, but in general, that it doesn't work that way. Because in general, the transients can be all over the place, and you don't even know how long they're operating for. It could be generations. Now, the chaos theory. Shall I take a breather, or shall I go to your question about that? Because it relates.
First of all, I think the idea of individually trying to do the best job you can really solves this problem of transient effects, because it doesn't allow for excuses or justifications to interfere into people's lives to change things. So, for example, a Buddhist type of mentality. I think that is an important factor in politics, where there's just an encouragement of individual morality. So, for example, right now in the United States, I would say that the one thing that people are competing in is victimhood status. Whoever can be the biggest victim is going to be the winner. We should change it to morality, and in a way it is, because there are people that are like, I'm vegan, or like, I'm pro-life, but it needs to be seen as something like, oh, they're getting lots of praise because they lost weight, or because they're a vegan, or because they're doing this. I want to be like that. I want to compete with that. Instead of, we need to kill everyone who doesn't believe this because it's moral.
So you're talking about virtue signaling. You're talking about the Gandhi's dictum of be the change you want to see in the world.
Yes.
As opposed to, make the world change to fit whatever it is that you think you see.
Yes. Doesn't that solve a lot of the problem in your article?
Well, it solves in as much as in this way it's relevant. In this way it does. In the way that when people are acting out of what I call methodological purism, they're feeling that they're being very principled, they're being moral, right? Because they're standing for a policy, or the setting of some social or cultural or political variable as it would be in the ideal world. But those settings, as I was saying, are necessarily not going to give you the best possible world, given the imperfections that we're in, given that you can't change everything immediately to the perfect outcome. So with that context, what you're talking about, and I agree with the thrust of the question, is a certain moral and intellectual humility. And it's and I think it does focus you on the bit that you can control, your own personal morality. I think we're talking about integrity here. That you can be absolutely sure that if you maximize that variable, your personal morality variable, it's only upside. There is no downside. Now, some people might want to make an obscure philosophical argument against that. But
probably they would use slavery or murder as an example.
Well, what, as an example of what? I mean,
if I know something is wrong, then I'm going to do everything I can to stop it. So if slavery exists, I'm going to do everything I can to stop slavery from existing, or murder.
Well, no, that's not true. Slavery does exist, and right now you're talking to me and not doing everything you can to stop it. And no human does, right?
That's true.
There's a number of philosophers that have said quite colorfully how, the stone in my shoe causes me more pain and distraction than, the deaths of millions starving to death in great pain around the world. And that is true. But for me, that fact makes the thrust of your question even more pertinent, because your integrity affects where you can act.
Yes. And so would you say it's a lack of control that leads to this mental error or mental jump, feeling like a lack of control?
I think that a system, a moral, political system, a way of viewing the world, gives one a sense of, I mean, it's very satisfying, right? It gives you a way of understanding.
Fulfillment.
Yeah.
Goal.
Intellectually and morally. I mean, I think for me, when I was younger, I think a lot of my religious faith was having a system by which I could measure my goodness. I think that served a deep psychological purpose for me years ago. And a
little bit more now with Jordan Peterson, would you say?
So a little bit more.
Like you got a lot of that back with Jordan Peterson, would you say?
No, I'm not. No, because I found my integrity absent a particular worldview.
Oh, okay, right? That makes sense. So you found essentially the same morals in a different way.
No, not the same morals. What I'm saying, and this goes to your question, I'm saying that the true domain of morality, or the most certain domain of morality, is integrity, is personal integrity, whatever that means for different people, however it manifests for different people in different places. So what I'm saying is, you may have, by some theory, the perfect set of rules by which to operate, to enforce on the world through law, through government, or through any kind of institution. Yet, if you do not have integrity, your net moral impact will be negative. If, on the other hand, you have, if you insist on behaving rigidly according to your system. If, on the other hand, you do not have a rigid system, but you behave always with the utmost integrity, your net moral and other impact on the world will be positive. And that drops out of, I would say, both some of the points in the article, but also, I would say, my experience of life. Maybe people have different experiences, but I would say
Peterson's axiom of Darwinism, a Darwinistic set of truth. What would be your response to that? And I think you did talk about that in another video.
Yeah, I did actually, didn't I? When I talked about favoring Sam Harris's epistemology and Jordan Peterson's metaphysics. So we're going down another path, which is a very interesting one.
We have about 13 minutes.
Okay. So what's the specific question you're asking me here?
Is there a rebuttal regarding using Peterson's Darwinistic framework as a axiom?
Okay, so here's a way in, if I understand you. I could join what I'm saying here to Peterson by using his concept, which is very powerful, of ideological possession.
Okay.
Right? He talks a lot about that. And purism, especially methodological purism, is a form of ideological possession that you act on in the world, especially in the political or legal or governmental realm.
Yes.
Right? And as I go into at length in the article, what Peterson talks about in a somewhat different domain, but this is a good question, is that when you're ideologically possessed, when you're methodologically pure, you will bear any cost in the meantime that you'll bear any transient to get to your perfect equilibrium outcome that you are sure, because of your system, will be. Your morality is justified by what you believe doing this over here will get me over there, as opposed to in the midst of the transient, in the being open to what's actually happening right now as a result of what I'm choosing to do or support, right? So it's here and now, not counterfactual and ideologized, right? And that's the opposite of, like, being open to the here and now is something you can only do if you're not ideologically possessed. If you are open to having your theory defeated by current data and evidence. And when I say defeated, I don't mean like utterly falsified necessarily, but just a sufficient awareness that what you think you know is incomplete because you haven't been able to conceive every single possibility that can bear on human existence. Certainly not in this hypothetical world that involves that you've built based on a belief in the values of certain metrics, right? So for a communist, it might be, material equality. For a libertarian, it might be liberty. Not only do people define those things differently anyway, one libertarian's liberty is quite different from another one's. But the point being that the principles that your political philosophy manifests or requires you to act on are justified by the value, liberty, that you're trying to maximize. Yet, in the midst of the transient, if you're open to what's going on as you change these variables, you will discover, if you are open, if you're kind of empirical about your approach to the world, you will discover that you didn't consider everything, that the variables that you want to control, their impacts are mutually dependent, they're interdependent, and completely non-linear, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can never predict. Again, this isn't just me hand waving. This is mathematics. I'm doing mathematics,
yes.
And you can demonstrate this kind of mathematics using
even if you got a supercomputer and you were like, okay, we can run the data. You still have to get all of the data and the variables, which is impossible to collect.
Well, yeah, that's true. That's true. And also, there's the whole question, Sam Harris versus Jordan Peterson aside, of whether you've even got a deterministic system. Because if there is free will, right? So if there's free will, you can't do it in principle. If there isn't free will, actually, it turns out you still can't do it in principle. And the reason for that, you can only understand through chaos theory, which you mentioned earlier. And the reason for that is, if you have a complex system, and again, I'm not even talking as complex as 300 million people. I'm talking, a pendulum swinging over 3 magnets will be complex enough. You can plot the physical parameters that describe that system. So let's say in the pendulum going over magnets, you might have the position and the momentum of the pendulum. Now you could know that exactly with complete precision, and you could plot it exactly and with complete precision. Mm-hmm. And then you may be able to say make true statements about the patterns, right? That over time are traced out in this velocity position space. You can begin to understand the system, but you can only understand the system at a certain level of description. And what I mean by that is, you may work out that you may see regularities in the pattern that is traced out by the physical system. But in principle, if you have a chaotic system, you can't work out the underlying dynamics that cause the patterns. You can't go from pattern to dynamics for a chaotic system, even if it's completely deterministic.
And this is where I disagree with Sam Harris. And I don't know how that's possible that I might be able to see this and he doesn't. But regarding free will and regarding of all the cognitive tests that they are doing that are very clearly kind of showing how the brain is kind of knowing about these decisions before they happen, they're not allowing for the possibilities of other areas in the brain or metaphysical concepts that can't be measured, even in a scientific and not a spiritual sense. Because psychologically, there's a lot of proof that free will, insofar as people understand that they have control over their actions, does exist, at least in a psychological sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think Harris would say, sure, but your qualifier psychological sense kind of is his whole point, that's different from an ontological sense. Now, I don't agree with Harris.
But I think it's pretty clear. I think it's pretty clear that we don't have free will in an ontological sense, because that's the whole reason people go to Alcoholics Anonymous, or like they try to that's why they train or get better or try to control their anger. It's pretty clear that we just can't make the free will to have the free will to do whatever we want and to do it, and that our actions are influenced tremendously by
Okay, hold on.
Conscious and subconscious.
But now you're saying something else, because I don't think anybody would disagree with what you've just said. But I do think, but that isn't the same as saying it's obvious that there's no free will. If no free will in an ontological sense, in Harris's sense, is it's all determined, right? Like that's what it means for that. Not that it's difficult to do what you want to do. That is psychology, or neurology. But he's saying ontologically, in other words, metaphysically, the idea that there is choice is in fact an illusion. In fact, everything that you do is just an emergent, and emerges from the laws of physics operating on matter, some of which is concentrated here, but that's not the only matter that matters in determining what you appear to choose to do next. Now, so it's interesting to me that I think you just agreed with Harris on that, having said you don't, because that's all that Harris is saying, that fundamentally it's an illusion. Now, I actually think that he might be wrong on that. As a physicist, I don't think that the universe is deterministic. And in the way, well, we know the universe isn't fully deterministic, but what I'm saying is, not only is it not deterministic, I think there may actually ontologically be freedom, that there may actually be will, and that is necessarily outside physical description.
Well, I think that the word he's using for free will, or what he's thinking is free will, the definitions are fundamentally different in the senses that we're explaining. I think that in terms of a metaphor for reality, or a metaphorical understanding of how decisions work, I think Freud is the most accurate representation, even though it's ontologically false. The id, the ego, and the superego, those concepts, I feel like metaphorically describe how we make decisions the best way that anyone ever has. And I get in debates with people about this who think I'm like really crazy and in the past, because you can prove scientifically that that's not how it works. But I don't think anywhere near the level of understanding of the brain we are to be able to even be doing tests about how our behavior works. I think metaphorical representations are the most accurate as of yet, until cognitive science gets a lot better.
So this speaks to what I was thinking about when I made my little video about Peterson and Harris, which is these models, id, ego, superego, are descriptions of a system, the components of which enable you to articulate heuristics.
Mm-hmm.
And a heuristic is a rule that gets you to an outcome without necessarily describing the mechanism in its most fundamental sense.
Yes.
So I think
the best way to look at it is animals. Look at what animals do and look at what humans do and try to find a difference. Because if there is free will, we have to look at where the line is. And a lot of people draw the line at animals. And I think the difference between humans and animals is that humans have a comprehensive understanding of, or model of the world that is continually changing, that monitors their actions before they do it. So a human, if they want water, they're going to have a comprehensive understanding of how that works. And if they go to get water, and that comprehensive model changes. So, for example, a chair suddenly manifests itself out of nowhere and appears, and you trip over it, then that is going to take priority over the water, insofar as at least a thought process, or like, whoa, what's that doing there? Whereas with animals, every time you open a door for a cat, it's like a new universe just appeared, because they don't have that. They know how to react, and they
how do you know that? That's a big claim.
That is actually, I read a book.
That can't be the case, because I mean, I must be misunderstanding you, because cats remember their environment.
They do. So This is actually a little bit complex because what I said isn't exactly a perfect analogy for how it works in their brains, but it's kind of hard to explain how animals experience their environment because they don't have what Freud would call a superego, and we do. So it's very complicated to explain how they live their lives. But I read a really, really interesting book about this a long time ago, and I don't have time to get into it now. But if you have any trust in the book I read, then I can tell you that they said basically the metaphorical understanding of what happens is it's almost like a new world is appearing. And then once it's almost like object permanence, I guess, for a baby. Out of sight, out of mind. But then when you give the toy back, they remember what it is. Is that
okay? No, no, okay. That was helpful. And also, again, the way you're going with this, I'm thinking of to kind of tie it up a bit. In considering the difference between a human model of the world and an animal's model of the world, that bears on how we got into this, the question of free will. The first thing that comes to my mind is my human model of the world may make me choose to die for an idea. Whoa. Like if you want to like hone in on, a concrete example of modeling of world that bears on free will, on choice.
I think dolphins have what Sam Harris would call what humans think have free will. I'm in the sense of Sam Harris doesn't think free will exists, right. But what we think of free will, what the average human you would ask, do we have free will? And they would say, yeah, we have free will. I think dolphins have that, whatever that is, our limited sense of choice. I feel like dolphins have that. Dolphins are also the only animals that consciously commit suicide for no reason.
So, okay, so is that the reason why you would say only dolphins and not chimpanzees? Like, why only dolphins? Because if you look at a primate, although the range of behaviors, motivations might be way, way more limited, you could still argue, I think, just by looking at them reasonably, well, they've just got free will, but it's operating in a much more limited domain.
Chimpanzees,
like, they don't look like machines to me. That's what I'm saying. Is a chimpanzee looks more like a human.
They're extremely intelligent, and they may have like a limited form of choice, but it's not like dolphins, because dolphins have a language where they can play games with each other. They can talk to each other. They can say things like the equivalent of "What's up? How are you doing? How was your day?" They can remember past events in an abstract sense to our knowledge.
Okay.
We don't know much about them because they're so much different than humans. Chimpanzees can remember past events kind of almost as in a physical sense. Like memories for chimpanzees and monkeys, we don't know much about, but it doesn't appear as if it's very abstract. They can remember past monkeys and past events, but it doesn't appear as if it's abstract. With dolphins, the latest research that I read, which was about 2 years ago, suggests that, like, based on the frequencies of their language, it's almost as if it's human-like. Like
so
the amount of things.
So you're talking there about intonation, are you? Emotionality in language?
Yeah.
You know, one thing that as you were talking just came to my mind is, I wonder how chimps that have social hierarchies, how they experience in memory what they know about other chimps, right? Like, do they actually have the feeling that another chimp is a bastard? Like, is that felt in some way?
I feel like, in a sense, it's almost like, I would imagine it to be like if you have a little brother and you know your little brother is going to be beat up at school because he's a wimp, and you went to a really hard school and you love your brother, but you want to like toughen him up and you want to help him. I would imagine like it's in that sense. Like a tough love type of mentality. I don't think they look at them and think mean things. I just think they probably feel badly. I would imagine.
Oh no, I wasn't meaning like what do they feel about like for some like a particular. How do they experience a particular kind of a relationship or perception of another chimpanzee? I was meaning, what does it mean for a chimpanzee to have a notion about another one that is going to affect their behavior in any way? Like, so you and I experience
it's more self-interested. I don't even think they're capable of that. It's so self-interested. Even humans are much more self-interested than they lie.
Okay, but then do they experience other people like a selfish human being experiences other people? Or do they not actually, or are they just reacting in a more instinct-driven way to what's in front of them? Or do they actually have a feeling that is based on a model about particular individuals? You know, who knows, right? I mean, I have no
dogs do.
I'm sure that, you know, actually
dogs socialization is much more complex than humans because we've domesticated so far that their prefrontal cortexes are almost as large as humans.
Yeah, and actually,
so
I think
dogs definitely can. I don't think chimpanzees really do.
They must. No, you know what they must do? I think we already know that if we stick a chimpanzee in an fMRI brain scan, there's parts of their brain that are going to at least correspond closely to parts of the human brain when they
capacity to. That's a better word. They have the capacity to. If you put them into an environment, they have the capacity to. But I know a lot about animal behavior because I've read a lot of brain studies, but they don't really use that part of the brain that much. I think they're more instinct driven, but they've never done a comprehensive study. I'll get a monkey next episode, and we'll bring them here, set them up to an MRI. We'll do some tests.
I like that. So we need to have another patron level to help us afford the no occasion shout fMRI brain scan.
Donate $1,000 a month so that we can bring animals in here. I don't know how to work an MRI machine or whatever they do, but I feel like I can figure it out. We have a physicist here.
Figure it out. No problem.
I pretty much have a degree in psychology. I'm almost finished. It would just hook up the nods. I'll look at it. I'll be like, okay, that area is the hypothalamus, and that's responsible for this. And then Robin will be like, okay, so that means, and then
we've got it sorted.
We have it all sorted out. We're going to see. But so
very good.
Free will. What did we do? We did the purism, and then it went to free will, and then as we found out, it's very hard to talk about free will, and it just goes into a bunch of random other topics.
The big thing to say about, I know we've got to wrap this up, but it's a big.
Okay,
thing,
go ahead.
Is if I'm right that there may in fact ontologically be free will, I think the
God?
The problem that we can see the brain physically reacting to things, right? Mm-hmm. Before we're consciously aware of the reaction, which is a huge empirical argument against free will, and that the things that go on physically in the brain seem to be deterministically reacting to certain stimuli, right? I think the way around that argument will probably involve the fact that our understanding of time is wrong.
I agree with that. And I would say training is a great example. Whenever I'm in a fight or whenever I went to a Taekwondo match, I would not remember what I did, but I would see footage and it would be combinations. I would be throwing combinations. I didn't remember anything of it though, but I trained over and over and over. So I think people can train their minds to a point that certain actions are deterministic, but they're deterministic from almost a reflex standpoint of underlying free will.
But the argument against
the time argument, but
the argument against free will is more fundamental. argument against free will is more fundamental than that, because you're not dealing with behaviors that you in any way control. You're reacting to things that you didn't expect, right? So there's no obvious conscious learning involved. And the thing is,
so I think there are instances where you don't have free will. I think there's places where animalistic deterministic behavior kind of override your super ego, so to speak, or your conscious mind. But I definitely think you're on the mark with time. And I think it probably has to do with what your conscious mind is able to observe and still react to.
Again, it's deeper than that, because the problem is you can stimulate me at time 0, and then I react at time t=1. But if you look at the brain scan, changes in my head were going on at t=-0.1 before the event. That's the issue.
Okay, yeah, it sounds like an understanding of time. Like whenever I'm really high, there's a lot of feeling as if I'm watching my actions from outside of my body. Whatever marijuana does, it affects time.
It sounds a bit like near-death experience. Out-of-body near-death experience.
It's every time is different depending on how high I am. Sometimes I feel the opposite. But whatever's happening, it's impossible to explain, and it has to do with time. So and probably because time is ineffable. And that's why there's probably a free will problem, is because I think you're right. I think that's one of the best arguments I've ever heard, is misunderstanding time.
And and as a physicist, I kind of like that one, because, the fundamental conflict between relativity and quantum mechanics is that quantum mechanics, you've just got t, and it's common sense time, a second per second, right? Like we don't have relativistic space-time inside quantum mechanics. And so I know there's something up with t in physics.
All right. Thank you, Robin. That's the episode.
All right.
Patreon.com/no-occasion. Vote for the next episode. And if you heard ideas on this that we want to talk more about them, comment. And if we like the idea of the episode, we'll put that in for next week. Every Friday, we're going to try to put out a video. And anything else to say, Robin?
No, that's great. This is fun.
All right, thanks. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe.